This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 340 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It's a super special one. I have gathered a bunch of Australian women podcasters for International Women's Day 2025. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast, and also pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples all across Australia. They are custodians of all the varied, beautiful lands where today's guests live and work and podcast. So I have been very excited to share this episode. I've been wanting to get this group of women together for ages and then decided that International Women's Day was a great motivation. We actually all introduce ourselves in the podcast recording itself, so I won't do it again here, other than to give a big shout out to Tracy Collins of the Global Travel Planning Podcast and the UK Travel Planning Podcast. Poor Tracy was all scheduled and ready to join us, but had a last-minute family emergency to deal with. You were very missed, Trace. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this fabulous chat with 6 wonderful women from Australian travel podcasting. Welcome, everybody. It is super, super exciting for me to have you all here in the one virtual room. The only thing better would be if we were all really together, but unfortunately, the power of technology at least gets us together. So first of all, I'd like to share where we're all from. So, of course, I'm from the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. And on the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, we talk all about ways that we can travel in a more mindful fashion, so that we can travel in a way that's kind of good for us, good for the planet, a win-win all round. So I'd love to hear about everyone's podcast. Can I start with Natascha?
Yes, hello. ExtraVirgin Food and Travel is my podcast, and it combines my 2 great loves and fields that I've worked in all my life, which is food and travel. So every episode I have someone come on either from hospitality or the travel industry just to have a chat about things that I'm curious about.
I think that's the best way, isn't it? If you want to know yourself, then it's bound to be interesting for someone else too. Thank you, Natascha. Carolyn.
Hi, well, it's great to be here, Amanda, and joining all you other lovely ladies. So thank you for having me. My podcast is the Holidays to Switzerland podcast, and every week myself and my guests introduce travellers to wonderful places that they might like to include in their trip when they're visiting Switzerland, and give them practical tips about transport and things to see and do. Anyone planning a trip to Switzerland, they'll get plenty of helpful info from the podcast.
I just had my sister here on the weekend and we are actually contemplating a Swiss family Christmas. So
I love hearing that.
I'm going to have to get back to you on that, Carolyn. Next, I have Caro.
Hey, Amanda, it's so great to be here. I'm just looking at all your wonderful smiling faces, and I wish everybody could see all the smiling faces that are looking at me right now. So, yeah, I'm Caro. I look after the Rescued podcast, and sort of the tagline on that is Rescued is an outdoor podcast for hikers and adventurers. And it's all about lessons learned. So, we often see stories on TV about missing bushwalkers or hikers or adventurers, even people at sea or on the snow, wherever we adventure in the outdoors. And we might hear a story of something that's gone wrong and we wonder, well, I wonder what actually happened, what went wrong. So my potty is all about getting into some really, I guess, I like to think of them as quite intimate interviews. So quite personal interviews with people who've been in a situation where they have been rescued, where something's gone wrong in the outdoors. And it's not only interviews with them to hear from their side what went wrong, maybe what they learnt from it. And it's also what we can learn from it. So it's all about lessons learned, but it's also from the perspective of people from the emergency services. So I say it's about the rescued and the rescuers all talking about their different perspectives, and also some academics and some clinicians as well. So it's all about helping us have better adventures, connect more to wild places in meaningful ways that not only look after ourselves and our mates, but also these precious places as well.
Perfect. Yes. Good overlap there. It's funny. I think when things go wrong is something people love hearing about too. Every time I have an episode that's something about when things went wrong, the downloads skyrocket.
We're fascinated.
I know. And I think we know because these people are on a podcast that, things went wrong, but it worked out. Then we're very curious and people learn a lot that way as well. So next up is Kirstie.
Hi there, I'm Kirstie. I'm a Kiwi living in Aussie. My podcast is called The World Awaits, and it's a podcast that I produce and host with my friend and colleague Belle Jackson. And we're both trained journos. We've both come from that background and we've got together about 50 years travel experience. The whole ethos of it is just to inspire people to travel. Our format is that we have, we interview someone every week. So similar to everyone else, we interview everyone from sort of the big guns in the industry to some of the smaller tour operators who are doing amazing things and giving back to community. And we have tips too. So we always try and give someone a bit of a tip. It can be anything from how to pack lightly, which I am completely unable to do, to, important things like visas and that sort of stuff. And we have a segment that's really popular where we ask all of our interviewees a question at the end, which is, what's the most bizarre thing that's happened to you on your travels? And we get some really funny and really interesting answers to that.
Yeah, the bizarre is often also the what went wrong or what didn't go as expected. And we love that. Lucky last, Di.
Hey, hi, I'm Di Bortoletto, and thank you so much, Amanda, for organising this. What a great initiative, and I'm so happy to be here. My podcast is with my friend and a fellow travel writer, Monique Ceccato, and it's called And Away We Go, which is how they start every Formula One race. Lights out and away we go. So our podcast is predominantly about Formula One, but it goes beyond the track limits to talk about travel, food and lifestyle surrounding the sport. So during the season and during race weeks, we'll do race reviews, race previews, talk about Formula One rumours and gossip. And then in non-race weeks, we interview people who are connected to Formula One somehow. So we've had guests on from Karting Australia. We've had a veteran PR who's been working in Formula One PR for 50 years, Annie Bradshaw. We've had F1 journalists. But we always talk about travel as well because we're both very passionate travellers.
Absolutely. Yes. I listen for the travel content, and also because you and Mon are so fun together that I just can't help it, even though, as you know, I have zero interest in Formula One. But
I know. And we're still friends.
I know. It's amazing. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. It is wonderful to be able to share these podcasts with a wider audience. I think they are all well worth listening to. So I now want to move on because we're talking about women and, we are all amazing women, and we've met many, many amazing women just in our normal lives, but especially on our travels. I think I always find when you're traveling, you get exposed to a greater variety of people, and you often meet some really fascinating people that you probably wouldn't come across in everyday life. We're going to chat about some of the great women that have impacted us or we've met along our travels. And I'm going to go a bit random and start this time with Carolyn.
Well, this impactful woman that I met was not actually on my travels, but she was a guest speaker at a function that I attended. And she made such a big impact on me. So her name is Stephanie Wallard. She's from Melbourne in Australia. And as a young woman, she went on a trip to Nepal. While she was in Nepal, she actually met 7 disabled women who were hard at work in a little tin shed trying to eke out a living for their families. Because they were disabled, they were severely discriminated against. They couldn't get jobs in regular workplaces. And so they were really struggling to survive. And meeting those women had such an impact on Stephanie that before she left Nepal to fly home to Australia, she used her last $200 and gave it to a trainer or someone who could train these women and teach them skills so that they could produce goods that they could then sell to earn an income. And when she got back home, she kept in touch, and through a connection with one of the local volunteer clubs, I think it was the Rotary Club or the Lions Club, she told them about, these women, and together they put together some sort of fundraising organisation, and over the years have continued to raise funds for these women and others like them. And I think the organisation has been going since about 2006. Something like 5,000 women have been educated and empowered and, given skills to help them actually earn a living and support themselves, which is just amazing.
Just from that chance meeting, really, when she was travelling. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And she was such a young woman. Like, I think she was 22 or something when she met them, and a 22-year-old could have done so many different things with her life, but she decided, no, this is what I'm going to do. So, yeah, her story just had such an impact on me when I heard that. I thought, wow, what an amazing young woman.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Actually gives me goosebumps. So, yeah, it's wonderful to hear those kind of people. That's fabulous. Thanks so much, Carolyn. All right, next story. I'm going to head to Kirstie.
My story is about a woman who I recently interviewed for Carry On Luxury, which is an online publication. Melita Coolmandis is an incredible woman, and she has such a great story. So what she did is she was traveling around Cambodia with her boyfriend, and she came across this little island, and it was just completely decimated. And the fishing industry had destroyed the marine life around the island. The island itself was completely decimated. She got talking to a local fisherman to someone about the island, and then she discovered that he sort of had he owned it or had a lease on it or something. And he, as she was leaving, he said to her, "Would you like to buy the island?" And she just went, "How much?" And he said, 15 grand US. And she was like, "Okay, I'll buy it." So she went back to the mainland, and she said it was back in the day. This was like 2005. She had to go through the bank system, got a brown paper bag filled up with this cash, had to get this. And back then it took like hours to get the fishing boat from the mainland back to the island. So she got on this little boat, and it was like 4 or 5 hours or something, went back out with her brown paper bag full of cash, bought the island. And then there were some locals living on the island. And so she, instead of kicking them off and that, she worked with the local community, and they literally completely transformed this island. And it's now called Songsa, and it's one of the leading eco retreats in the world. And it is the most beautiful resort. And she's completely rebuilt this island completely back to, the way that it was before it was completely decimated. And her efforts, along with the local Cambodian government, have actually created what was the first marine reserve in Cambodia. So she started up a foundation, and she's now working with, to ensure that they sustain this marine park around the island. And she's helped the locals by obviously keeping them on board and working with them. It's a great story. And in all of this, she had a marriage breakdown. She was on her own, a single mum with kids, and she also had cancer. So she is such an incredible and I think inspirational, sustainable travel pioneer. And now she's about to do it all again in northern Cambodia. So I just hold her in such high esteem and think she's just a truly remarkable woman in travel.
That's incredible. I love the idea of just saying, "Okay, yeah, I'll buy the island."
What a bargain.
Yeah, it does sound like a bargain. That's a fabulous story. I'm going to throw to Caro in the middle.
This woman I'm going to speak about, she definitely wears a superwoman emblem on her chest. Sometimes I don't think she can see it herself, which I think is probably true for a lot of these women that we're talking about. And I'm so excited to tell you and everyone listening about a wonderful person called Rochelle Olsen. And Rochelle is a Melburnian woman, and she's known these days as the force behind an organisation called Escaping Your Comfort Zone. And that was born out of being an adventurer herself, but living within a plus-size body. She's done incredible things. She's cycled, 5,000 kilometers down the west coast of the US. She's done marathons in Nepal. She's done all these incredible things. And I think traditionally people who live in bigger bodies, there's this assumption that, they can't, or they shouldn't, or, oh, what are you doing in Lycra? Or all these kind of, constraints that are put on people in bigger bodies. And she, has started this organization, and the amazing sort of tagline with it is that, the outdoors don't care about your size, pace or fitness, and neither do we. She started this organisation. She's inspired it sounds like such a cliched word, but inspired so many women and non-binary in Victoria. She's won awards through Vic Health. She's had grants and funding from Vic Health to run more of these throughout the state and to get more people out there and doing things. So she's running all this on one side, and then on another, she's now the executive officer, I think, of Bushwalking Victoria. So she's overseeing and helping to develop and to promote and to, help put in some more foundations within, this huge network of thousands and thousands of people who are bushwalking, and normalizing this sense of people in bigger bodies. And one of the things that I loved when she was telling me about some of her work, and she was quite sort of shy about it, and you sort of start bringing out these little gems, these gold nuggets. She said, oh, well, I think I've been responsible for about 3 divorces. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what do you mean by that? And, but it was wonderful, but it was sad because she was telling me stories of people who, for all of their lives, these women, had lived a life where their relationship with their partner had led them to believe that they weren't able or capable to get outdoors and to go and connect with nature. And, we all know that spending time in nature it's so beneficial for our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, community, connecting with other people, all these kind of things. But yeah, these women have 2 or 3 women who've had divorces is because they've actually gone on trips with Rochelle that she's organised or been on some of her outings that may only be like a couple of kilometres, like not massive, and it's all within very inclusive and supportive environments, that they've come back from a few of these things going, oh my goodness, realising that it was their partner who was keeping them on the couch at home, not just themselves and the
penny dropped.
Exactly. And then they're starting to get a little, well, if I can do that, I wonder what else I can do. I can learn to rock climb. I might be a size 24, but I can. All this kind of stuff. So yeah, Rochelle Olsen, absolute weapon of humanity.
That's amazing. Yeah, incredible story. Natascha, tell us about your special woman.
Well, my special woman is someone I used to work with, actually. Her name is Susanna Clark, and I was a journalist while she was a photographer. We both worked on the paper together. She's just one of these people who just decides to do something and she does it. So she decided that she didn't want to be a photographer anymore. She wanted to be a journalist. So she went and did a course, and somehow she convinced our bosses to let her have a go at feature writing. And within a year or two, she was the arts editor of the newspaper. She's amazing. And then she, climbed the dizzy heights and she decided to leave, and she went with her husband to live in Fez in Morocco. And she bought this rundown riad in the Medina. They renovated it together. And that's no mean feat because you can't get equipment or trucks or anything. Everything has to be done by hand, and it has to be done in the old way, historically, slow. And then, of course, there were, language difficulties. She didn't speak any Arabic at that stage. So she renovated it. And while she did that, she wrote a book called A House in Fez, which is a really lovely book. It was great. She also, while she was there, she and her husband, Sandy, who's also a journalist, he's been a journalist for many, many decades, and he's quite a bit older than her. They adopted 2 children from the Medina as well. One was a toddler, the little boy was a toddler, and his sister who was a baby. So she's in her, I would say, and Susanna, if you're listening to this and I get it wrong, please forgive me, but I think she's in her late 40s, early 50s, and her husband maybe 15 to 20 years older. So she was a new parent with these 2 babies living in the Medina. And I really love her fearlessness. She just decides to do something, and long after, we would have given up and gone, oh, it's just too hard. I mean, adopting 2 children in Morocco is not an easy thing to do. Neither is restoring a house. She just kind of goes on. And she's just so joyful and curious, and she really embeds herself in whatever culture she's in. I think if I could live my life again, I would like to do what she's done. She's really inspiring for me.
People like that who can just say yes when they have what sound like kind of crazy ideas. Yeah. I agree. Always very impressed by them. I don't think I can do that. Fabulous. Thanks, Natascha. Di, tell us about, I love your idea. I know who you're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, I can't say anyone else except my mum, because she's given me the sense of curiosity, a love for travel, and she's still traveling. She's 78 this year. Last year, we spent 3 weeks in Puglia in July when it was like 40, 100 degrees every single day. And she, broke out in a heat rash, but, she coped and just got on with it. The year before, we were in Italy again with my niece and my sister. And the year after COVID and travel opened up again, we were in Borneo and we were travelling with my sister's family with her 2 kids who were at that time 13 and 15, and we were staying in the jungle in a tree hut, like up a tree in this wooden hut with no running water. We had bucket showers, like no electricity, totally out of my comfort zone. You know, you can't call for room service or, you know, it was just, yeah, totally. And when we first got there, she got bitten on the face by a wasp. The whole half of her face swelled up. Her eye almost closed up.
Your poor mum.
I know, right? But thankfully in this little group that we had, there was a pharmacist and a doctor, and both of them just pulled out this massive array of drugs. Like, do you want antihistamines? Do you want this? You want painkillers? And so she took what they were offering and just got on with it and was like, no, I'm not missing the night jungle walk. And off we went on the jungle walk. And, you know, she just avoided mirrors because she couldn't bear to see herself looking like the elephant woman. The poor
Probably
thing,
not
'cause
many mirrors in the jungle, so it's a good place to be.
No. Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, Mum was, I guess, is my biggest inspiration and, you know, has always placed an importance on new experiences and I guess going out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself a little. And the fact that she's still doing it well into her late 70s.
I love that you said your mum, because as you know, well, as we're recording this, it's just a couple of days after the first anniversary of losing my mum. So I've been looking back on a lot of the travels that we did together, and mums who travel well are pretty special influences, I think, especially for their generation, that they were brave enough to go out and see the world as they did. It's much easier for our generation. They're pretty cool people. So I loved having that. All right. Well, my great woman is someone who impacted me and I think has probably impacted lots and lots of people, but in a kind of a quiet behind the scenes way. Must be 7 or 8 years ago, I was on a trip to Japan. It was a media trip. There was just 2 of us and our guide, Mariko. So we had a week all around the Kansai region with Mariko, who was, I think she was in her early 70s at the time, and she'd been guiding for many years already. And she was this tiny thing, but absolute pocket rocket. There'd be times we couldn't keep up with her because she had just so full of energy. And you guys know what a media trip is like. Sometimes they're very busy. This one was very, very, very busy, and she just didn't stop. She was amazing. But anyway, we had quite a few fabulous meals together. You know, I love Japan. I love Japanese food. And several times we had meals that featured renkon, you know, the lotus root with, you know, all the holes in it. And every time that we had that, she would hold up, you know, she was a funny little thing, and she would hold up with her chopsticks, obviously, hold up one of these slices of renkon and look through the holes, like peer through the holes of it. And she just made us laugh, and, you know, we'd have a good joke about it and we would do the same thing. And, you know, that was just a thing. And then the very last day we were in Kobe, and we went to the Great Hanshin Earthquake Memorial Museum. I think that's its name, something like that. And I'd been there before when I lived in Japan, but I have a thing about earthquake and disaster museums. I really not enjoy them. I really appreciate them because I think they're really important. I always find them fascinating. So I was really looking forward to going, and it had been updated quite a bit since I'd been there previously. So it was super fascinating. And I was walking around with Mariko, and then I kind of thought, oh, hang on. I now remember during the week that she'd said she, you know, some years back had lived in Kobe. And so I suddenly thought, oh, hang on, maybe she was in Kobe at the time of the earthquake. And so, you know, we'd known each other for a whole week by then. So I thought I could, you know, it's quite a personal thing to discuss, but I thought I could ask her. And so I did. I said, you know, were you living in Kobe then? And she said, yes, I was. And I said, oh, well, you know, what was it like? And she told us the story that she had been living in Kobe with her husband, you know, fairly recently married, and they were sharing a small house with her parents. And her parents lived in the bottom floor, and she and her husband lived in the top floor. And so you can probably imagine where this is going. The earthquake happened, their top floor crushed down to the bottom floor, and both her parents were killed, which is just, you know, like I've told this story so many times, but it still gives me awful goosebumps because I just think, oh. And so she said to me, Amanda, that's why I'm always looking through the holes, through the renkon, into the future. You just have to keep looking forward. That's the only way to get through life. And that's how she'd got through all these years since that, like, just awful tragedy. And she was such an optimistic and joyful person. And I've so many times since then thought about her and that story.
Amazing.
Yeah, wow.
If you hadn't asked the question, she never would have shared that story. And then now we can all hear it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. But she was someone I still think about so often. Such a beautiful woman. So, on that note, let's move on to our messages for women. So we want to talk about some of the lessons we've learned or other women have taught us, maybe on our travels, on our podcasts, in life in general. Natascha, go ahead.
Look, I have to say that, my learning is not deep, but it's something that's come to me over time, which it was sort of brought home to me with a woman that I interviewed. She's a Brisbane woman, actually, and she's part of an organisation that does home swapping. And I didn't know this, but this particular home swapping has been around for a couple of decades, and it was started for teachers because, they had long holiday periods. And so these teachers would all go to each other's places in different countries. And so that's how this organisation, which is a not-for-profit home swap, started. And she goes every year for a couple of months somewhere. And the last year she went to, she went to 3 different places, but the last place she went to was the Netherlands. And she stayed in this small town somewhere of no note at all whatsoever. She stayed there for 3 months. And she said every time she met someone from that town, they'd say, "Why are you here? What are you doing here?" And it reminded me of a similar time for me when I was in Italy. And I went to this tiny mountain village, and there was one restaurant, and they opened just for myself and my friend because there were no tourists in this village whatsoever. And there was this organisation there called Le Donne della Montagna, the mountain women. And they had started this organisation of, it's called alberghi diffusi, so diffused hotels, because you can't have hotels in those villages. You can't build, and it's, they're protected and they don't have the money anyway. They put you up in rooms, different rooms around the villages. So I remember her being really surprised. She was one of the first people who ever said to me, "How did you find this place? Like, why are you here?" And then everyone we met on that trip asked that same question. And one thing that I've learnt over this time is that to really understand the people of the place that you're visiting, you need on your itinerary somewhere to be in a place that is famous for nothing in particular, just an ordinary workaday town where, you can see people going about their business, and they will ask you, "Why are you here?" And they'll be really delighted that you are here. And so I always try to build at least a couple of days into my itinerary now. And I still get questions from other people now, usually like, "Oh, why did you go there?" Or "There's nothing there." It's just to see what life is really like, because it can be hard to get a true picture of what life is like when you are immersed in, the mass tourism like that.
I love that.
Such an amazing story, and it rings so true for me too, because when I was cycling around Sardinia last year, we were so fortunate that I did a sort of side trip into an area that had just been named the latest blue zone, which is where people live the longest and healthiest lives in the world. And it was at Toluca, and it's between Kia and the actual region of Toluca, which is the tiniest little town, and no one goes there. And here we were able to go to this place, and I met with a historian who wrote a book about all of these centenarians, and he took me into their homes to meet them. And it was just the most rewarding and touching and memorable experience of travel for me. And exactly what you're talking about, it's just the importance of, maybe getting off that beaten track a little and going to these places that you wouldn't maybe necessarily otherwise visit because of the people.
It doesn't mean that you need to be an intrepid traveller. It just means that you need to just think a little bit outside the box. Actually, I have to say that I'm doubling down on this, and I'm going to Italy for 3 months from April this year. And I'm staying in a village that every time I say the name of this village, people just look at me completely blankly, because it's between Rome and Naples. It's in the hinterland a little bit. It's an old village. There's nothing there except people living their lives. And everyone's like, "Oh, why are you going there?" Why not?
Why not?
Yeah, I love that. I wrote down what you said, Natascha, which is going to be one of my quotable quotes: to be in a place that is famous for nothing. I think that's gold.
It's also quite restful for yourself when you're traveling a lot and doing, running around and sort of ticking off things, to just have somewhere. I'm not really a sit by the pool kind of person. I still want to be out there observing and talking to people. So that's also a good rest break for me as well.
Yeah, and there's no better place to do that than in Italy, really, is there? It's
You're biased,
just,
Di.
totally biased and I'm going to own it. But it's, everyday life in Italy and so many countries. It's just so wonderful to just experience it, whether you're an observer or a participant. Good on you, Natascha. That's awesome.
Sounds perfect. All right, fabulous. Thank you. I'm going to go to Di.
A lesson from my travels has been to be open to opportunities and just to be more open-minded. And I think that's what travel does to all of us anyway, whether we're conscious of it or not. It does tend to break down barriers. It tends to reduce or get rid of prejudices. When you've got a better understanding of a place, the people, where they come from, where it just helps you have better, a wider lens. And one of the things when I very first started traveling in my early 20s was that I was a bit of a scaredy cat initially, and I had walls up and I just said no to people inviting me places thinking that, they were going to abduct me or steal my money. But then, I later found out from other travellers, they got invited to a Turkish wedding or they went to some other amazing experience. So I think trusting your instinct, being open to opportunities and breaking down prejudices, that's, at the end of the day, we're all people. We all bleed the same colour. We're all the same, essentially. So that's what travel has taught me.
I love that, Di. I absolutely agree with all of that. I was just discussing this with someone recently, the wanting to say yes. And it is a thing that we women do have to be more cautious about, unfortunately. And it's crazy now that I travel with my son who's 6 foot, I actually already am noticing the difference compared to traveling, as a single mother with a small child. Traveling with a 6 foot boy makes a whole lot of difference. We can do things that I would have not felt safe doing. And now I think, well, he can beat up anyone. It's fine. He's not the violent type, and I don't know if he could or would, but I think I feel safer nonetheless, which is, a sad but true fact of the world.
It is. Even just going out at night to a restaurant and, if you're on your own, it's like, are there taxis available and they are going to be able to get home safely, or do you have to walk? And having all those considerations where you're with a male, whether it's a 6 foot son or a burly husband, those things they don't weigh on your mind as much. So it does make a difference.
Unfortunately. I had an amazing presentation by Lucy Barnard. Has everyone heard about Lucy?
Yes, I'm interviewing her next week on the World Awaits.
Excellent. Well, everyone, you better jump in and listen to that interview on the World Awaits. But I can tell you that, so Lucy's, I'm just going to name drop here, Lucy's a mate of mine. She's currently, she will become the first woman to walk the length of the world. And she's back in Australia at the moment, and she started in the route to Patagonia, I think, was it 5 years ago now? And she's now heading into Alaska, like from North Wyoming, I think. So she's come back for her visa. Hearing her talk about what it's like to be a woman to travel solo, except with, of course, Wombat. And I won't say who or what Wombat is. I'll leave that for the World Awaits podcast. It's a fascinating and sad and scary thing. But to follow on from what you said, Di, about saying yes to things, is also finding the power of saying no to things as well when they come your way. And even no to your own plans and your own thoughts of what you might do when you go somewhere and your own itinerary, and you go, actually, I'm going to go to X and I'm going to do Y, and I've got my itinerary, laid out like a travel famille. Oh my goodness. And then I get there and go, no, you know what? I'm just going to do a Natascha, and I'm just going to sit in a little village with a book or sit at the cafe and go and talk to people.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, me too.
Yes and no. It's important at the right times. Now, speaking of the right times, Carolyn, I know your story will probably segue in here nicely.
Yes, well, mine is a practical lesson, and it's a quote that my first job actually out of school was at a travel agency. And I remember my boss saying, if people can't afford travel insurance, then they shouldn't be actually traveling. Every trip I've ever been on, I've had travel insurance. And sadly, we've had to make claims on numerous occasions. everything from spilling a cup of tea over my laptop and it dying to things like my husband having kidney stones and ending up in a French hospital for 5 days. A whole range of experiences. And I think a lot of people, I mean, we all like to think we're bulletproof, nothing will happen to me. But something even as simple as, rolling your ankle as you walk down the street can have a serious impact on your travel plans. Really, the price we pay for travel insurance is so minuscule when you compare it to what the cost of hospitalisation and evacuation, if it's required, that can be in the tens of the hundreds of thousands before you even know it. So definitely, I never travel without taking out travel insurance.
That is a very important thing to remember. Absolutely.
It's something that I've been talking to my son about for a long time now. Do you remember, Amanda, when we were at that travel conference a couple of years ago? And I think, was it in Thailand? But somebody came to talk about, I think she was from the Australian Embassy, about accidents that happened, particularly, I think she was from Indonesia, people riding without helmets in Bali, and lots of people who'd never thought to even get travel insurance who would then sort of ring the embassy and say, well, can you get me home? And they'd have racked up these massive bills and the embassy would just, they can't do anything about it. So when he travels, I'm always at him, and he's a very sensible child, luckily. So he's good about it.
And also travel insurance in your own country as well. And this sounds a little bit unusual, but in Australia, and I know you've got listeners all around the world, Amanda, but here in Australia, we've got this Medicare health insurance, public health insurance, but it actually, depending on the state you're in, doesn't actually cover ambulance. If you need to get rescued by a helicopter, let's say in any of the wonderful wilderness locations of Australia, if you don't have ambulance insurance or travel insurance, then you can be up for a really, really big bill.
I didn't even realise that, Caro. So that is good to know. Yes, indeed. Okay, I'll head around to Kirstie now.
Okay, well, I'm just going to start with a very short little quote. That's my favourite quote about travel, which is, "We travel not to escape life, but for life to escape us." And I just have to say that because we're talking about all these inspirational things and to do with travel, and that, to me, that's a really rings really true for me. And to some people, possibly is about escaping their own life, but for me, it's certainly about living life and getting out and sort of experiencing other cultures. And like Natascha was saying, the sense of place and meeting new people and new cultures is so important. But my little lesson that I wanted to talk about is actually from a woman that I interviewed on the podcast. Her name is Laura Waters. And Laura's actually taught some incredible lessons, I think, to many women and many people generally from her own experiences. So Laura was actually working in corporate life and wasn't particularly happy in her life and the life she was leading at the time. And she decided to walk the length of New Zealand. No small feat, 3,000 kilometres actually so she was going to walk Aotearoa, New Zealand with a friend of hers. And so they land in New Zealand and they start the walk. And I think it was about day 1 or day 2, the friend pulled out. And so Laura could have gone one of two ways. She could have just given up and decided, well, how can I walk near on 3,000 kilometres on my own? Will I just go home, or what will I do here? So Laura actually decided to push through, and she actually hiked the entire length of the country, and this was post a pretty messy breakup too, on which she's open about, on her own. And the thing that Laura was so incredible about, she had this epiphany when she was doing this hike, and she said that when she came back, she decided that she sort of realized she wasn't really living the life that she wanted to live. And I think that this is a really good lesson about travel, right? If you challenge yourself and you step out of your comfort zone, and Bruce Prentitt from G Adventures talks about this a lot, and I've interviewed him on our podcast too, and he's fascinating. And Laura really did live this. So she really stepped out of her comfort zone. And what came out of that was, through this travel and these months and months of hiking solo across New Zealand, that she actually realized what she really wanted out of life. And she came back, and not only that, she came back and she wrote a book about it. She's completely transformed her life. She's now a travel writer, a full-time travel writer, speaker, an adventurer. She's just paddled the length of the Murray. She's just a truly remarkable woman in my eyes. And I just felt like her story, when she told it to me on the podcast, I just had goosebumps. It was so inspiring. And I think she's just a real inspiration for any woman about, what we can actually achieve. And if you actually just do that, step out of your comfort zone, challenge yourself a little bit, and travel can really be incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely. Listeners may remember that a few years back we did have Laura on for our book club. So we all read Bewildered for the Thoughtful Travellers book club. And it was one of our most popular book clubs ever. And of course, we could get Laura on to talk about it as well. So I think she is absolutely one of those just normal, nice people who then does crazy things, like, as you say, walking the length of New Zealand or paddling the length of the Murray, learns so much from it and passes it on so beautifully
Yes,
as
does.
well. So I'm super glad that you mentioned her, Kirstie. I'm going to go next, and then Caro, you're our final one. So my message is actually really from a bunch of women that I met, more than 20 years ago now. I spent a year living and working in Slovakia post-Cold War, but before Slovakia had joined the EU. So it was relatively early days, and, Slovakia was the poor cousin of what's now the Czech Republic. So things were quite difficult there. And in particular, what I learnt was that many women had been well trained and well educated back in socialist times, and then they were kind of dropped and had nothing to do and no way to earn their living. So I made a really close friend there. She was in one of the classes I was teaching, and then we realized that also she lived opposite me and we could see each other's apartment windows from our balconies. So we used to go out and wave, and so we became besties in Slovakia. But she had been a speech pathologist with a PhD who used to run training all around Slovakia, or Czechoslovakia even. She was a renowned expert. But then capitalism doesn't need all these speech pathologists, apparently. So, nope, sorry, there's no more work for you. And the only job she could get was a kind of a trainee job in a telecommunications company which had just come to Slovakia because, of course, they didn't need telecommunications companies before then. So she had this really low-level job, slowly working her way up. And she and her friends, who had also been speechies and teachers, had ended up living, I think, 4 of them in a 2-bedroom apartment. That was the only way they could afford it. And yet she never, ever complained. And I loved, working together with her through some classes, becoming good friends. We're still friends to this day. And the things I've watched her go on to do after having what I think is that, culturally really difficult situation, and so many women there too, is just being open and flexible and looking forward. And, here I would complain bitterly, I think, if that happened to me. But I learned from Zika that, hey, no, this is things happen, life happens. Let's just be open. Let's be flexible. And when things seem very unfair, it's not actually much point dwelling on how unfair they are, because that usually doesn't change anything. I often think of those lessons.
Amazing.
Okay, lucky last. Caro, tell us your message.
Oh, my message, I guess it leads on a little bit from Carolyn's talking about the importance of travel insurance. My bit of advice comes from a woman, Dr. Kate Bacher, who I interviewed on the Rescue podcast. And she is an incredible woman, a background in the military and also in outdoor adventure. And she's a clinical psychologist who specializes in trauma in remote and outdoor, or just basically in the wilderness. So it's quite a niche, but it's born out of how do we respond to trauma anywhere it happens. And I guess when you think about travel and why we do it, why we go, and we travel makes us the people we are, and it changes who we are. But it can be in travel that things can happen and they can go wrong and they can be frustrating, and, things don't always go right. And, that can be, people can say, oh, it can be the making of you. But for some people, some of those things could even be quite traumatic, and some really bad things can go wrong. So to do a return back to one of your comments at the start of the podcast, I was actually once abducted when I was traveling, when I was very young. And on my first backpacking trip overseas, don't worry, I'm okay. And it actually had it was an interesting ending. It was a good ending, but things can happen and they can change us. And so Kate's advice, which is absolutely amazing, is that she says the best thing you can do to protect yourself is to know you're ugly. So what does your ugly look like when everything is going on and something really bad has happened, everything's going wrong around you, and when you're traveling, you don't have your support networks around you. Where do you go inside yourself? Where do you go to find strength or that resilience? Where do you go? So, and you only get to know that when you know what your really ugly looks like. Like, are you snot bubbling? Are you just catatonic? Can you not speak? Do you just need to shut yourself in a room? Do you need to reach for a bottle of Chardonnay? I mean, what is it that you need to do? Like, what does you at your worst look like, really? And when she says, when you know what you at your worst looks like, then you need to know, what do you need to be better? So when everything's going wrong, what do you need? Do you need someone to just say, hey, how you doing? Do you need a hug? Do you actually need another person? Or do you need to have time alone? Do you need to seek out, some external support? Do you need medication? Do you need whatever it is, the support that you need when things are all going to shit? Know that. So it's a little bit of, know thyself, traveller. And that can be an amazing piece that you can travel. Pack in your luggage for that how to pack light, Kirstie. Put that in your luggage as well, knowing yourself.
I was going to say, what's going to help me out is a Ferrari, $1 million and a trip to Italy. So,
So you're easily pleased, Di.
I'll just take the Italy trip. I'm happy with that. But I will have a giant suitcase.
Oh, Caro, that's beautiful. I want to give some more thought to that. The knowing you're ugly is I think that sounds like a really powerful way to frame. Because sometimes when you're traveling, it's not all okay. And you're right, you're missing a lot of normal support around you usually. So I love that. Well, thank you so much, you absolutely fabulous, amazing, brilliant women, for this excellent conversation. It's been absolute delight. We're just going to go quickly around because I want everyone who's listening to know where they can hear more from you. So I have been Amanda from the Thoughtful Travel Podcast.
Carolyn here from the Holidays to Switzerland Travel Podcast.
Oh, thank you, first of all, Amanda, for having us. It's just been a really lovely experience. And so thank you for hosting this. And I'm Kirstie Bedford, and I'm from The World Awaits.
Natascha Mirosch from ExtraVirgin Food and Travel.
I'm Caro from Rescued, which is an outdoor podcast for hikers and adventurers.
Lovely. And lastly, because Di, I have known you the longest and we saved the best till last.
I'm Di Bortoletto from And Away We Go F1 podcast, a podcast that goes beyond the Formula One track limits to talk about food, travel and lifestyle.
Fabulous. Well, I'm sure you can tell I had a lot of fun recording that episode. It was so lovely to chat with all these fabulous women podcasters from all corners of Australia. So one last big thank you to Caro Ryan of Rescued, Natascha Mirosch from ExtraVirgin Food and Travel, Dianne Bortoletto from And Away We Go F1 podcast, representing herself and her co-host Monique Ceccato. Similarly, Kirstie Bedford from The World Awaits, representing herself and Belle Jackson, and Carolyn Schernerfinger from Holidays to Switzerland Travel Podcast. I will leave links to all of these podcasts and more in the show notes. Don't forget to come along and either join our Facebook group or LinkedIn group, or both, why not, for Thoughtful Travellers. They are easy to find by just searching for Thoughtful Travellers in those platforms or by clicking on the links in the show notes. And the newsletter for Thoughtful Travellers at Substack is gaining steam quickly. Great place to interact as well and see what else is going on in Thoughtful Travel land. And you can find that at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All these links and more, and a picture of us all chatting together at notaballerina.com/340. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. And as always, thanks so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.